They didn't leave a note. They didn't leave a number. They left me $40 and a half-empty box of cereal. And my mother said on her way out the door that I was old enough to handle things. I was 12? She said it like it was a compliment. My stepfather had already loaded the last bag into the car. I watched from the living room window as he put his sunglasses on, adjusted the rearview mirror, and backed out of the driveway like it was any other Tuesday. My mother didn't look back at the house. Not once. They were going to Cancún. 2 weeks. My mother had been talking about that trip for months. The resort, the all-inclusive package, the excursion she'd already booked. She showed me pictures once on her phone, scrolling past them with this look on her face like she was already there. I stood at that window for a long time after the car disappeared. The cereal was the kind I didn't even like. The $40 was on the kitchen counter in an envelope with my name on it, which felt formal in a way that made my stomach hurt. I opened it and counted the bills twice. 2 20s. I put them in my pocket and stood in the kitchen and listened to how quiet the house was. My name is Noelle. I'm 31 now. I have a good apartment, a job I don't hate, a cat who ignores me in a way I find comforting. When I tell people this story, they usually get this look on their face, somewhere between disbelief and outrage, and I understand that reaction. I had it too eventually. It just took me a while to get there. That first night, I told myself it would be fine. I made a bowl of the cereal I didn't like and ate it standing over the sink because I didn't want to sit at the table alone. I watched some TV. I checked my phone. My mother had sent one text, landed safely. Behave. That was it. No phone number for the resort. No emergency contact, just behave. I typed back okay and waited to see if she'd say anything else. She didn't. I went to bed with all the lights on. I was in 7th grade at the time. The school was about a mile and a half from the house, and I walked it every day, which was normal. What wasn't normal was that I walked it now with no lunch and no lunch money, and a kind of hollow feeling in my chest that I kept trying to explain away. I told myself I was fine. I told myself she'd send more money soon. I told myself a lot of things that first week. The $40 went faster than I expected. I'd never had to buy food before. Not real food, not a week's worth. I went to the grocery store the second day and stood in the aisle for a long time trying to do math in my head. I bought bread, peanut butter, a box of pasta, a jar of sauce, apples because they were on sale. I spent $26 and stood at the self-checkout feeling like I'd done something very adult and very wrong at the same time. That left $14. I made the pasta last 3 days. I ate the apples one at a time, slowly, the way you eat something when you know you're rationing it even if you won't say that word out loud. I brought a peanut butter sandwich to school every day and ate it fast so no one would ask questions. On the 5th day, I called my mother. The call went to voicemail. I left a message that I tried to make sound casual. Hey, just checking in. Could use a little more money for food when you get a chance. I hung up and stared at my phone and waited. She texted back 2 hours later, "You have money, make it last." I read that text probably 15 times. I kept thinking I was misunderstanding it. I kept thinking there was some other way to read those words that made them make sense. There wasn't. I had $7 left. I bought a bag of rice and a can of beans and a carton of eggs. I watched a YouTube video on how to cook rice because I had never done it before and I was scared I'd burn it. The first batch came out mushy. I ate it anyway because I was hungry enough that it didn't matter. I got better at it by the second time. I started keeping a notebook. I don't know why exactly, maybe because I needed something to do with all the feelings I didn't have anyone to say out loud to. I wrote down what I ate each day. I wrote down how much money I had. I also started writing down other things, like how the house sounded at night, and what I did when I heard noises, and how I'd pushed the couch against the front door the first few nights until I realized it was just the pipes. On day 9, I used my phone to film myself walking through the kitchen. I narrated like a nature documentary. Here we have the last 3 eggs. Here we have the rice, which is almost gone. I don't know why I did it. I think part of me already knew, somewhere deep down, that someone should see this, that it shouldn't just disappear. The money ran out on day 10. I sat on the kitchen floor and tried to think. I was not a dramatic kid. I wasn't the kind of person who cried easily or made a scene or asked for things. My mother had spent years telling me I was mature for my age, which I understand now was a way of saying I was convenient. I didn't ask for much. I didn't cause trouble, I handled things. But I was sitting on a kitchen floor with no money and almost no food and a week still left to go, and I thought, I have to tell someone. The problem was, I didn't know who. My mother's sister lived 4 states away and we weren't close. My grandparents on my dad's side were gone. My dad was a whole other story, one that ended when I was 8, and he moved to Oregon and called less and less until he basically stopped. I hadn't heard from him in 2 years. I thought about the neighbors, but I didn't know them well enough to knock on their door and say, "My mother left me with $40 and she's been gone 10 days, and I'm out of food." That sentence felt impossible to say out loud. So I went to school the next morning with nothing in my bag, and I sat in first period and stared at the board and tried to pay attention. But I kept getting distracted by how light-headed I felt. I hadn't eaten since the night before. I'd had half a cup of rice and then I just stood in the kitchen and couldn't make myself eat the last of it, because I didn't know when I'd have more. My English teacher's name was Mr. Hensley. He was the kind of teacher who noticed things. I don't know how to explain it except that way. Some people look at you and they just see a student, a body in a chair, a name on a roster. And then some people look at you and they actually see you. Mr. Hensley was the second kind. He stopped me after class. He said, "You seem tired." I said, "I'm fine." He looked at me for a second longer than was comfortable and then he said, very carefully, "Is everything okay at home?" Something happened in my chest when he asked that, like something had been held very tight for a long time and then it just shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I just looked at him and said, "Not really." He asked if I'd eaten today. I said no. He got very still in the way people get when they're trying not to show how alarmed they are. He asked me to sit back down. I told him everything. Not in an organized way, it came out in pieces in the wrong order, with long pauses where I tried to figure out what was important. I told him about the $40. I told him about the cereal and the rice and the eggs. I told him about the notebook. I told him I'd filmed it, some of it, on my phone. I told him my mother was in Cancún, and I didn't have the number for the resort and she'd told me to make it last. He was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then he said, "You did the right thing telling me, and I'm going to make sure you're safe." I didn't know what that would mean. I don't think I really understood, in that moment, what was about to happen. I think I thought maybe he'd call my mother, she'd get in trouble. She'd come home early and be angry. I thought the worst thing that would happen was that she'd be angry. I was wrong about that. Mr. Hensley walked me to the counselor's office and stayed while I repeated everything. The counselor, whose name was Miss Petrov, asked clear and careful questions. She asked about my stepfather. She asked about other family. She looked at my phone when I showed her the videos. I watched her face while she watched them, and her expression didn't change much, but her jaw got tight. She asked if she could make copies. I said yes. She told me that what I was describing was neglect, and that she was required by law to report it. She said those words plainly, not apologetically, which I respected even then. She said CPS would be contacted and they would take it from there. She said, "You are not in trouble. You did not do anything wrong." I remember nodding. I remember thinking, I know. But it still felt strange to hear someone say it. That afternoon, a woman from Child Protective Services came to the school. She was calm and practical and didn't talk to me like I was fragile, which helped. She explained what would happen next. There would be a home assessment. They would try to reach my mother. In the meantime, I could not go back to the house alone. They tried to reach my mother for 2 hours. She didn't pick up. They called the resort through the travel itinerary that Miss Petrov had somehow found. I still don't know how. And eventually got through to the front desk. My mother called back 40 minutes later. I was in a small room down the hall, I didn't hear that conversation. But afterward, the CPS worker came to find me, and her face was very neutral in the way faces get when they are working hard to be neutral, and she said, "Your mother is aware of the situation. She'll be returning tomorrow." She asked if there was any adult I trusted who could stay with me that night. I thought about it. There was a woman next door. Older, retired, used to wave at me in the mornings, and I'd spoken to her enough times to know her name was Dolores. She'd mentioned once that she'd raised 3 kids and still missed having noise in the house. I gave them her name. Dolores opened the door when the CPS worker knocked and didn't seem surprised in the way I expected. She seemed more like someone who had suspected something was wrong and had been waiting to be asked. She made me soup from a can and toast and sat at the kitchen table with me while I ate, and didn't try to fill the silence with a lot of talking. I was grateful for that. I slept in her guest room that night. It had a blue quilt and a lamp with a yellow shade, and it smelled like cedar. I slept for 10 hours straight. My mother came home the next afternoon. I know this because Dolores told me when she got the call. My mother had been escorted from the airport by 2 people from CPS and a police officer. I wasn't there for that. Dolores had suggested, gently, that I might want to stay inside, and I think she was right. I found out later what my mother walked into. There were people in that house waiting for her, the CPS worker, another officer, and eventually a representative from the county. They had my notebook. They had the videos from my phone. They had 10 days of documentation that I had created without knowing I was creating documentation, just because I needed somewhere to put the feelings. My mother's version, from what I understand, was that she thought I was old enough. That she'd checked in. That it wasn't as bad as it looked. Nobody agreed with her. There were charges filed. Not immediately, these things take time, and the legal process is slow and unglamorous, nothing like what you see on TV. But they were filed. My stepfather, who had been part of the decision to leave, was included. There were court dates. There were hearings. There was a family court judge who looked at my notebook and the videos and the grocery receipts I'd kept. I'd kept the receipts. I don't know why. I just hadn't thrown them away, and said words like willful neglect and dereliction of parental duty in a tone of voice that made the air in the room feel different. I didn't go back to live with my mother right away. For a while I stayed with Dolores. Then, when the courts got involved more formally, there was a placement process, which is not fast or easy but which eventually resulted in something I hadn't expected. My dad called. He'd heard somehow. I don't know the chain of phone calls that led to it. But he called, and he didn't make excuses or try to explain the years. He just said, "I'm coming." And he did. It took 3 months to sort out all the custody pieces. I stayed with Dolores those 3 months, who never once made me feel like a burden and who made real soup, from scratch, and taught me to make it too. My dad drove cross-country with a U-Haul and an apology he'd clearly been rehearsing, and I let him give it. And I didn't tell him it was enough, because it wasn't, not entirely. But it was a start. I am 31 now. I live in a city I chose. I have a job where people rely on me, and I show up. Because showing up is something I understand at a very deep level. I have a therapist I'd been seeing for 4 years who says things like, "You learned early to self-regulate in order to survive, and your body kept score." And I nod and I work through it, because that's what you do. I still have the notebook. I kept it all these years. It's in a shoebox in my closet, underneath some other things, and I don't look at it often, but sometimes I take it out and I flip through it. The grocery math, the daily logs, the handwriting that looks smaller and younger than I remember being. And I feel something that isn't quite grief and isn't quite pride. It's more like, I see you, kid. I see what you did to hold yourself together. My mother completed a parenting course. She lost custody. She got supervised visitation for a while and then, eventually, very limited contact. We speak maybe twice a year now, on holidays, in short phone calls that are polite and careful and mean almost nothing. She has never, in all those years, said, "I'm sorry for what I did." She has said things like, "I thought you were ready," and "I didn't know it would go that far." She has not said, I was wrong. I should not have left you. I used to wait for that. I don't anymore. What I know now is that the $40 was not a mistaken judgment. It was a conclusion she'd arrived at a long time before she walked out the door. That my needs were secondary. That my independence was more convenient than her responsibility. That I could be managed from a distance and it would count as parenting. She'd been leaving me in smaller ways for years. Cancun was just the one that left a paper trail. Some people who hear this story ask what I would have done differently. Whether I should have asked for help sooner. Whether there was a faster way to get someone to see what was happening. I think about that question and I keep coming back to the same answer. I was 12. I was doing everything I knew how to do. I kept a notebook because I needed somewhere to put the truth. I filmed the empty kitchen because something in me understood that evidence matters. I told my teacher when I finally couldn't hold it anymore. I did the things a 12-year-old could do with what she had. The adults around me, one of them anyway, did their job. And that changed everything. If you are watching this and something in it feels familiar, not the Cancun part, maybe, but the part about being called mature as a way of being made invisible, I just want you to know that being capable of surviving something does not mean that thing was okay. Strength is not consent. Handling it is not the same as it being handled right. You deserved someone to show up. So did I. I know that now. I kept those grocery receipts for years without knowing why. 2 crumpled slips of paper, rice, beans, eggs, a bag of apples on sale, tucked inside a notebook a 12-year-old carried around because she had no one to talk to. I didn't know I was building a case. I thought I was just trying to survive the week. That's the thing about doing the right thing when you're a kid. You don't always know that's what you're doing. You just do the next small thing you can manage. You eat the mushy rice. You write it down. You keep the receipt. Because throwing it away feels wrong somehow. And then one day a teacher looks at you, really looks at you, and asks if you've eaten, and all those small, careful things you did turn out to matter. Mr. Hensley didn't save me because he followed a protocol. He saved me because he paid attention. That's a form of decency that doesn't get talked about enough. The ordinary moral courage of noticing someone and not looking away. He could have told himself it wasn't his business. He could have assumed I was fine, because I seemed fine. Instead, he asked one careful question, and that question changed everything. That's what integrity looks like in practice. Not a grand gesture, but a moment of honest attention when it would have been easier to move on. And Dolores. She made soup from scratch. She didn't fill the silence with reassurances I didn't need. She just fed me and let me sleep and treated me like a person who deserved to take up space in her home. I think about her a lot. How someone who had no obligation to me became, in those 3 months, the steadiest presence I had. She wasn't performing kindness. She just was kind. There's a difference, and kids can tell. What I understand now, that I couldn't have articulated at 12, is that what I did, keeping the notebook, filming the kitchen, finally speaking up, was its own kind of intelligence. Not book smarts. Something quieter. The ability to observe what was happening, to trust that it was wrong even when no one had told me so yet, and to find a way to make the truth visible. I didn't have the words for what was being done to me, but I had enough sense to document it. That matters. Knowing what you're seeing, even when everyone around you acts like you're not seeing anything, that's a form of wisdom that doesn't come from a classroom. And the grit it took to get through those days alone, that part still surprises me when I look back. Not because I was brave in any dramatic sense, but because I got up every morning and went to school and did not fall apart, even when I was rationing apples and sleeping with the lights on. That kind of persistence doesn't disappear when the crisis ends. It becomes part of you. It becomes the thing that carries you through the harder, quieter struggles that come later, the ones no one films, the ones with no resolution date. My mother's choices had consequences. She didn't expect, because consequences don't care whether you meant to cause harm. Leaving a child alone with $40 is not a gray area. It doesn't matter how independent the child seemed. It doesn't matter that she landed safely and sent one text. What she set in motion came back to her, not as punishment from some outside force, but simply as the natural result of what she did. The notebook existed. The videos existed. The receipts existed. Truth has a way of outlasting the people who hope it won't. I don't carry this story as a wound anymore. I carry it as evidence of something I want to remember. That doing right by someone, even a quiet kid who seems like she's handling it, is never a small thing. And that a child who holds herself together in the dark deserves, eventually, someone to turn on the light.